Here we are back at the Streets of Paris shops. In this tutorial, I'm going to cover outfitting the flower shop. So let's get started. The flower shop is located on the first floor in the middle. And in terms of the walls and the ceiling, I use some decorative paper, and those papers will be listed in the supply list on my blog post to go along with this. And then the floor and all the moldings that you see are from the Architecture Digital Image Kit. That's the same kit that I've been using to do all of the trim work for all of the rooms. And then this room is different because there's a hole in the ceiling that goes between the first and second floor, and the purpose of that will be an elevator will go there so that you can get up to the second floor. And you'll notice as I go through and tell you how I put this together, the center of the room is open, and that is because the elevator is going to have to sit there to go up. Now this particular shop is different than all the others in that it's the only one that has the real door and the two windows. And I covered the construction of that in the first video that I did on doing the entire construction of the building. And so if you want to reference back to that, it's at timestamp 24 minutes and 31 seconds into the video. And that's how I talk about all the details that I did on that. Now the kit does come with those, the door and the windows and all that. So except for the fretwork that I have in the middle, but it comes with the basic pieces with the house. A couple of other things that I actually attached to the structure are first, this purple vine that you see. This is just so cool. I think it really makes the entrance look fabulous. And it comes in a sheet, and you can just kind of pull it apart. It's the same kind of vine that I used on the trellis for the chocolate shop, except this one's got all the purple flowers in it. And so you just pull the thing apart as much as you want, and then I just use regular glue to put it up on the walls. And you can see how that looks. I've got it in the corner and going up the side. It's kind of nice since this shop is recessed from the main structure. It looked kind of neat to have that in there and then kind of coming up the sides. The other thing that I had actually attached to the structure were two window boxes. Now these are little ceramic window boxes, and they're filled with flowers. Some of the flowers are polymer clay, and some of the flowers are paper. For the pots and the tubs that are holding the plants and the flowers, I did a couple of things. One is I used some pre-made things, and then I also constructed some things. And you can see here the pre-made things. I'm using wooden pots, and then the other ceramic pots that you see there. There's two different kinds. A basket instead of a pot. And then I also use thimbles as pots. So I did things like either paint them, or I also used some of the stone paint. You've seen the spray paint. You've seen me use that many times. And if you look at this picture, the pink flowers are in a gray pot. Now that's been sprayed. That's a wooden pot that's been sprayed with that type of paint. And then here you can see one of the pre-made ceramic pots that has the little tree. That's just a little plastic tree that I cut the bottom off of and then put it in that pot with some stones around it. And I left it the color it was, the terracotta. I just used my finger to apply a little bit of teal paint on it just to bring out the details. And then here you can see there's a cart there, and in it you can see where the red roses are. That's a basket sitting there in the cart. And then this is probably the easiest way to see the thimbles. Inside I have some of the thimbles stacked up. I painted them various colors, but many of the plants, the leafy plants, are in those little thimble pots. As I mentioned earlier, I made some things, and this one is a little tub for flowers. If you look at a florist or flower shop, you see they have these little aluminum tubs that the stems of flowers are in. And I did that by taking this little plastic cup and spray painting it with silver paint inside and out, and then adding these little handles that I had in my stash. And then here you can see what the finished tub looks like. And I ended up having extra flowers of tubs and stuff once I put everything together. And so I did end up putting them in other places around the shop. So here I have one by the cafe, and I actually have a little thing about the flowers in it. And then I have one on the other end by the chocolate shop. Another type of tub that I made were these long tubes. And I made these by using transparency film, and I cut two different sizes. The smaller size, the shorter one, is 1.5 inches high by a 2 1/2 inch wide strip, and then the taller one is 2 inches high strip by 2 1/2 inches wide. And I just rolled it up and glued it into a tube. And then I took that tube and glued it onto a piece of transparency film, another piece of transparency film, and just glued around the edges, and that way I would get a bottom. Now, once I'd done that, then I sprayed it all silver, and then once the silver had dried inside and out, then I took some scissors and cut away the tubes from the transparency film. So it's a lot easier to make the bottoms if you just glue that down on the transparency film before you spray it. And then the spray also acts as additional glue to make it stick to the bottom. And then, you know, I glued them together, and I like the idea of the shorter ones in front of the taller ones. And that's what I did for all of these long stem flowers. Before adding any of the flowers or leaves to the pots or containers, I added paper clay first. And the paper clay is what's going to help me place the items exactly where I want them. It's going to keep them standing up. It will stay wet for a long time, so you've got plenty of time to work with it. And then once it dries, all of the stems from the leaves and the flowers will be kind of glued in place. Now, it does shrink, so it's going to pull away from the edge of the pot, so you might want to go ahead and just lift it out and put some glue in the pot and then put it back down. But it just worked wonderfully for keeping everything standing up exactly how I wanted it while I played around with bending things and making sure I had everything the way I wanted it. The only container I did not do that for were the tubes. So all of the other pre-made pots, the big tins I made, are the big things that I made, the silver ones with the handles, and also the basket. All of that, I put the clay in it first. Once I'd finished either painting or decorating my containers or making all the other containers, now it was time for the fun to do all the arrangements in the containers. And first I'll talk about flowers. Pretty much every flower I used was a pre-made paper flower or some kind of a fabric flower. I'd originally intended to make some clay flowers, but I just ran out of time. So all of these are pre-made, and then with the exception of a couple things, I mentioned the ones in the flower boxes under the window. Those are a polymer clay or ceramic, and then there is one flower arrangement. I'll point that out further when we get to that point. That is made out of polymer clay that a friend gave to me. But other than that, it's all paper or little fabric type flowers. Now, some of the flowers, the scale was just maybe a little too big, and I wanted to make them smaller. So there's a few things I did. One thing is, obviously, you can easily pull off some of the petals so that you get rid of some of the paper, and I did that on a lot of the roses. But then I also did some things like these two that you see here, where I actually glued the petals together to make it smaller. So the first pink one, I put some glue in the center there and just smashed it together, and it kind of gave it a different look and made it much smaller. And then the second one, again, I put glue in the center and then just kind of curled it up so it made a smaller bud. And then here in the tub you see what the pink flower looks like when I have them all together. And then here in the next one you can see the tub in the front there with all the different pinks and whites. Those are all the ones where I just kind of smashed them together into more of a smaller bud. In addition to the paper flowers, another thing I used were plastic plants. Here you can see a variety of plants. I already talked about the tree. And then I used this set of plants here that you see. There's all kinds of different ones. And then there's this little bush. I used that as well. And then another thing I did was take this vine and cut it up into small pieces. And I used some of it as a plant by itself. And then I also used it as in addition to flower arrangements. Just like with the flowers, I added the paper clay to the pots before I put the plastic plants or vines in those pots. Now the last thing that I also used to create all of the greenery is this new collage sheet of leaves, and there are 45 unique leaves, and there are 4 copies of each one, and I also sized them a little bit differently so that would give some variety. And then there's also a digital image kit, and it's high resolution, 300 dots per inch. So if you had a project where you wanted something a little bit bigger, maybe you're doing a collage project or something like that, then instead of a miniature project like I'm doing here, then you could make them bigger if you wanted to, or even smaller. So I ended up using these in combination with flower arrangements and also to create potted plants by themselves. Now here you can see a bunch of flower arrangements. The pots that you see, the larger ones were miniature dishes that were like for ice cream or something like that. They're bigger than a 1/12 scale. And so I painted those white. Those were in my stash. And then I had used vases in the cafe in the last video on each of the tables with flowers, and it came as a set, and so I had some of those left over. And then the flower arrangement in the back, which you can't really see the pot it's in, it was the lid off of a small spray bottle. So I kind of went around the house looking for anything that was really small that I could paint or turn into some kind of a pot for a flower arrangement or a vase for a flower arrangement. And then the things they're standing on are just blocks of wood that I've glued together and painted and papered. And I thought that would be nice for inside the shop where these things are staggered, the already pre-made arrangements. And of course you'll see that on the inside when when we go to that part. Now, the one in the middle, that is the polymer clay one that was given to me by a friend, so I did not make that. The rest of the items that you see are the pre-made flowers, and also you can see on the one on the far right, I've used some of that vine, the greenery that you see in there that goes up and is long and kind of spindly. That is some of that vine that I've used in there. Now, this grouping of flowers shows you which ones that I used where I took the images off the collage sheet. And so all of the leaves that you see in these four, the pot and the three vases, those are all paper images from the collage sheet. And I've put a piece of wire behind them and glued them in the back of them, and then of course bent them however I wanted, and then inserted them in either the pot or the vases. Now here you see some of the plants that I made using the collage sheet, and you can see how you can really get a pretty realistic look. And I've never seen, you know, very exotic leaves and stuff like that. You can find paper rose leaves, miniatures, things like that, but there's just not a whole lot of variety. So the images really allow you to create some really cool looking plants. And now you've seen this already with the pot and the clay. So when I was doing a lot of the flower arrangements and putting the flowers in a lot of containers, I had to snip the stem shorter, and I kept all those stems. And then I was able to glue those stems to the back of the leaves. And then once the glue dried, you could bend them, shape them, and then use that to insert them into the pot. Now, if you're going to see the back of the leaf, depending on how you're putting the arrangement together, you could do a couple things. You could print the image twice and flip it so that the two pieces fit together. Or you could do what I did, which was I printed the collage sheet on one side, and then I ran it back through the printer, flipped it, and printed a green mottled color on the back side. And I have three different green images for you, different shades and of stuff that you can use. I will have that on the blog, my blog, for you to download. And these are the size that they would print on an 8.5 by 11 paper, so they fit perfectly behind the leaf collage sheet. So that's one way to do it. Of course, you could always ink it or color it or whatever, but it's pretty fast. Just run it through your printer twice if you're going to be printing your own images. To give things more of a dimensional look, I added things to the flowers and to the leaves. And the first thing here is I used micro beads, and I added micro beads to the center of the sunflowers to make it look more seedy, how it looks, how a real sunflower looks. And then to the leaves on a lot of the plants, I added a product called pollen. It's very, very fine. And if you look at the plants that have the red in the center, there's one at the bottom on the left and the one at the top on the right. I have added this red pollen to those just to accent that. And I just took a little paintbrush with some glue, very, very delicately applying the glue where I wanted it, and then sprinkle it with the pollen. And then if you look at the plant in the top there with the pink and green that stands up, well, the green and white leaves that are right below that, they have their little veining is, I used a green color. And then I also, on the further down to the at the bottom on the right, I use some around the little edges, and it comes in a lot of different colors. So I think that's part of what helped these look even more dimensional than just the image makes them look. Another option, of course, too, if you've got white flowers, is that you can always dye them with alcohol ink. And it's kind of nice just to buy white flowers, and then you can create any color you want. To display some of the plants and flowers, I've used a couple of carts in front. The first one here you can see with the two wheels, kind of a flatbed cart. And then here you can see it's full of, you see the basket and a bunch of plants and whatnot. And then the other one is a two basket one upright. And then here you see it's got plants on both of those areas. And I painted all that kind of a coppery color, like a dark copper. Before I move to the inside of the shop, I just want to cover the awning and the lighting. You'll notice that the awning is different than the ones that you've seen me use on the last two shops. And I have this awning for you to download for free. It does require 2 sheets of paper. It wouldn't all fit on one sheet of 8.5 by 11. And I also included a separate strip for the front if you don't want the lettering that I use, the French Love of Flowers for the shop name. You could put whatever you want instead. And so I've covered assembling all of the different types of awnings that are available for this project. And here you can see a picture of those. And I did that tutorial back in the Chocolatier. So if you want to review that, if you're not quite sure how to put this particular awning together, you can go there, and on that video, it is the assembly of the awnings. All these different awnings starts at the 32-minute mark. So my approach to the lighting was different as well, since I don't have a window that the awning is over that I can insert the lighting. I needed to put the lighting right against the wall itself. So again, I'm using tea lights, and this time I am attaching magnets to the tea lights. And so one magnet would go, one side of the magnet would go on the, get glued to the light, and the other one would get glued to the wall. Now, if you didn't want to use magnets, then you could use Velcro. We do the same thing. So you could put one side of Velcro on the light and the other one on the wall, and all that fits nicely up underneath that awning. So that's one of the nice things about that awning, other than it's just nice to have a different style. It really is deep enough to hide, big tea lights. And of course, the reason I did that is it makes it easier to turn it off and on, and of course, replace the battery. So that's how I did the lighting. And I used 3. You could use 1 or 2, whatever you like. I like a lot of light, so I decided to use 3. The first thing on the inside is I added a little bit of decor, and I did this with the images, panels that you see of the women. Right here you can see one next to the table above the flowers. Now I used 4 images, 2 on each wall, flanking each of the tables. And those images come from another new collage sheet that has all of the Art Nouveau women. And they're all nature scenes. So I used the 4 at the top, and then there's another series of them under that. And then some Art Nouveau type borders to go with that. And then if you look again at the same area, you can see that I've added glass shelves, and they're microscope slides like I've used before. And then I have used this little flourish that I've bent to make an L bracket to hold them on the wall. And on this particular set of shelves, you can see that I have painted several of the thimbles, and so those are empty pots waiting to be filled. And then on top there, you can also see some bags and a box. Now that comes from another new collage sheet. I've made a series of bags and boxes and containers for flowers that are custom to this particular shop. And then if you flip to the other side, I've got another set of 2 shelves in between the 2 panels of the ladies. And again, you see more box and bag and a flower arrangement and pots full of plants, the plastic plants that we talked about earlier. And now if you look below, I've got a table. Now this is a little kit that you put together, chipboard kit. And underneath it, I have a pot of flowers and then another bag with flowers in it. And this is a old cash register, and I painted it black and inked it up just to give it, to let more of the definition of all the details pop out. And then I've got this flower pot, and this came this way. It was already a pot with flowers in it. And then I've just got some little invoices underneath that. And if you go back to the other side again, you look at the table over there. Now that's a little wooden like kitchen table. That's really cute. And I painted that white, and underneath I've got some tissue paper, more of the bags, the cone type bags for the flowers, a box. And on top you can see that I've made up some flower arrangements and wrapped them in tissue paper with some ribbon. And this piece comes with the drawers, but I pulled those out and I just took some pieces of wood and wrapped some ribbon around it, so it looks like a ribbon dispenser instead of where those drawers were. And then of course there you see a box, and it's got a flower arrangement inside of it. On the back wall above the door, the decoration that you see there is die cut chipboard that I painted black to match the fretwork that's going on in the color of the door itself. And then in each of the far corners, in addition to some of the potted plants, I have taken, I've divided up the flower arrangements that were on the wood block stands and put those on in each corner and on each side of the door. That wraps up the flower shop. As usual, down in the description area, I'll have a link to the blog post that goes along with this. In that post, you will find all the free images that I talked about, information on the collage sheets and the digital kit, a complete supply list of everything that I used other than the things that came out of my stash, and also a link to a lot more pictures so that you can look at that in detail. Now we filled up the bottom of the shops, the building, so now we're going to move to the top floor and second floor, and we're going to do the House of Fashion next, and I'll have that available sometime in the middle of August. I'm going to be working on some other projects between now and then and taking a little vacation, so I'll be back in August with the next segment.